Sometimes betrayal isn't about you at all. It's about the lies they told themselves to survive the weight of what they did to you, and how they couldn't stand to face the truth in your eyes. Welcome to Broken Truth, where love meets lies, and every story reveals the pain behind the smile. Some people betray not because they stopped loving you, but because they couldn't carry the guilt of what they were becoming. So they lie not just to you, but to themselves. They rewrite the story so they can sleep at night. They say you changed, or they felt trapped, or this isn't what they wanted anymore, when deep down they know they broke something sacred. The lie becomes their shield, because admitting the truth would make them the villain in their own story, and not. Everyone has the courage to face the damage they caused. So they run and they cover it in excuses. He stopped holding her hand long before he let go of her name. It began with the little things, quiet forgettings that didn't look like betrayal from far away. Missed texts, conversations that stalled. Mid-sentence, a gaze that once knew her face like scripture now drifted like it was searching for exits. Not eyes, she noticed the shift, not all at once, but like watching sunlight fade through blinds, slow, unremarkable, then suddenly gone. He didn't fight with her. He didn't accuse or blame. He didn't even speak much anymore. And in that silence, she tried to read him like a map, wondering where he was going without her. Because he was going, even then, he still smiled sometimes. But not the way he used to, not the kind that made his cheeks rise and his eyes fold into warmth. No. It felt polite, performed, like someone nodding to a stranger they vaguely recognize but can't quite place. She asked him once, gently, like you ask a sick bird if it wants to fly again, "Are you okay?" He nodded. Of course he did, because that's what guilt does. It cloaks itself in calm. It smiles to survive. The truth was, he had already done something he couldn't forgive himself for, and he hadn't told her, not because he was afraid of her reaction, but because he was afraid of what her forgiveness would mean. If she forgave him, it would make him look even smaller in his own eyes. It would make him feel seen, and he couldn't handle being seen, not anymore. Not after what he'd done, so he began to rewrite the story. Not aloud, not in words, but in action and emotional distance. In stories he told his friends behind her back, "We've grown apart," he'd say, or "She's changed," or worse, "I don't think she gets me anymore." All lies. But easier to carry than I hurt her, and I don't know how to live with myself. She tried harder, thinking it was just a phase. She cooked his favorite meals, left notes in his jacket pockets, kissed him softly when he seemed lost in thought, but none of it reached him, because he had already decided that love wasn't his to deserve anymore. Still he stayed. That's what made it cruel. He didn't leave in one grand gesture. He lingered like a ghost still wearing his skin, like someone trying to convince themselves they hadn't ruined everything just yet. She started noticing things that didn't add up. Locked screens, strange pauses before answering questions, new cologne that didn't smell like home. He was erasing pieces of her presence from his life while still showing up for dinner. One night, after he came home late, with hollow excuses, she asked not accusingly, but heartbreakingly softly, "Is there someone else?" He flinched. It was enough, but he didn't say yes. He didn't say anything, just turned his face away. Like shame was a language he'd forgotten how to translate. That silence was her answer. He couldn't say the truth, because the truth required courage, and he had used all of his up trying to lie to himself. So instead, he made her the problem, not in loud, angry words, but in sighs and emotional withdrawal, and subtle gaslighting that made her question if she was asking too much. If love was meant to feel this unsure, he began to talk about needing space, about feeling suffocated, about finding himself. All the usual scripts people recite when they're trying to escape the scene of their own crime without being noticed. But she noticed, she always had. He left 2 weeks later, no shouting, no storm. Just a bag packed quietly, a kiss on the forehead. a whisper that sounded like, "You deserve better," when what he really meant was, "You deserve someone who hasn't already broken your heart behind your back." She stood in the hallway long after he left, staring at the space where his shoes used to be, not crying, just still, like grief had turned her to stone, because how do you grieve a person who's still alive, just not honest? How do you mourn a love that wasn't taken, just slowly undone by someone too ashamed to admit they couldn't carry it? Days passed, then weeks. Friends asked what happened. She didn't have a simple answer, because the betrayal hadn't been one moment. It had been slow, shapeless, 1,000 cuts she hadn't noticed until she was bleeding alone. She found out the truth eventually, a friend of a friend, a photo online, the other woman, the overlap, the timelines that didn't match his stories. But by then, it didn't matter. She wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. She was just tired, not just of him, but of trying to make sense of someone who never gave her the truth. Only pieces edited to protect his image. That's the thing about people who lie to escape guilt. They convince themselves they're doing it to protect you, when really they're just running from the mirror. He still tells people she was too much, that the relationship faded, that he tried, but she knows better. She was the only one who tried, and now she no longer needs the story to make sense. She just needs to find herself in the silence he left behind and rewrite the ending without him. She stopped checking her phone by the window. That was the first shift. No more waiting for a message that wouldn't come. No more imagining his name lighting up the screen like a ghost trying to return. It wasn't because she stopped missing him, but because something in her quietly accepted that even if he came back, it wouldn't be the truth she deserved, just another version of the lie. Softened by regret, but still wearing the same mask, she started walking again, early mornings, before the world became loud, shoes on, no destination. Just the sound of her steps on pavement and the wind curling past her shoulders like an old friend returning. She thought of him less, not because she forced herself to, but because her days began filling with herself. Small things, warm coffee, sipped slowly, a playlist that didn't remind her of anyone but made her feel alive. Conversations with people who asked how she was and actually stayed to hear the answer. Healing didn't come in a wave, it came in pieces. A moment where she laughed and didn't feel guilty. A night where she slept without replaying their last words. A morning where she looked in the mirror and didn't see someone abandoned. Just someone still here. She journaled sometimes, not about him, but about herself, what she liked, what made her feel safe, what kind of love she wanted next, if it ever came, and more importantly, what kind of love she would give herself. Even if it didn't, because slowly she began to understand something. He didn't lie because she wasn't enough. He lied because he wasn't ready to face who he was when he hurt someone who had loved him deeply. That wasn't her burden to carry anymore. She didn't need an apology to free herself. She just needed to stop reopening the door for someone who walked away instead of facing the truth. One evening, a mutual friend mentioned him casually, said he'd asked about her, said he looked different, tired maybe, still searching. She smiled politely, didn't ask for more. She no longer needed to know how he was doing because for the first time in months, she was more interested in how she was doing, and the answer, quietly, steadily, was better, not perfect, not fully healed, but breathing without ache, existing without shame. She still had scars, but they were hers now, not evidence of someone else's guilt, but proof of her survival. She made new rules, not walls, just gentle boundaries. She wouldn't beg to be understood anymore. Wouldn't offer softness to someone who only knew how to run from it. Wouldn't confuse someone's silence with mystery, and most of all, she wouldn't keep her worth tied to someone else's ability to see it. That was the turning point. The day she no longer needed him to say I'm sorry for her to feel whole, because she had already chosen herself, and that was enough. Healing isn't always about closure from them. Sometimes it's about coming home to yourself, piece by piece. If you've ever been left in silence and still chose to rise, your story matters. Subscribe to Broken Truth for more stories that speak to the heart of what love and loss really feel like.